Hello, dear story lovers. At the amount of 1,000 subscribers, I will post a huge series of special stories for you. Subscribe now. The morning air was sharp, biting through the remnants of what once was a bustling city. Joel adjusted his scarf as he stepped over a pile of charred rubble, his cybernetic dog, Spark, moving ahead with mechanical precision. The soft whirring of Spark's servos was the only sound, cutting through the eerie silence of the war-torn landscape. Joel's life had become a rhythm of scavenging and evading the war's grasp. New Denver was no longer a city but a graveyard of twisted metal, collapsed buildings, and scorched earth. For years, Joel had avoided the ongoing conflict between the Eastern Coalition and the Western Alliance, focusing instead on staying alive in the fringes. Spark, a relic of his past work in military engineering, had become his most loyal companion and protector. That morning felt like any other. Joel was combing the outskirts for anything useful, scraps of metal, leftover rations, or forgotten tools. Spark sensors, far more advanced than any human sense, detected the faintest of anomalies. His glowing blue eyes flickered, signaling Joel with a short, clipped bark. "What is it, boy?" Joel asked, crouching beside the dog. Spark tilted his head, the light on his collar blinking yellow, a sign of an organic heat source. Joel frowned. Heat signatures in the wasteland usually meant trouble, stray animals, malfunctioning drones, or, worse, armed scavengers. Still, his curiosity got the better of him, and he followed Spark as the dog navigated the maze of debris with ease. It didn't take long to find the source. Behind a collapsed wall, half buried in dust and ash, lay a man in a dark, tattered uniform. Blood stained the fabric, and his pale face was streaked with dirt. Joel's breath caught when he recognized the insignia on the man's chest, a red crescent with interlocking gears. Eastern Coalition. Joel instinctively reached for the weapon strapped to his hip, but the man was unresponsive, his chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven breaths. He was young, probably in his mid-20s, with sharp features that were now softened by pain and exhaustion. A deep wound on his side was crudely bandaged, the fabric soaked through with blood. "Enemy," Joel muttered, standing over the soldier. "What are you doing out here?" Spark tilted his head, letting out a soft whine as if urging Joel to act. Joel glanced around nervously. If anyone saw him aiding an enemy combatant, it could mean a death sentence. The war didn't allow for acts of mercy. The rules were simple: enemies were to be neutralized or left to die. Joel knew better than to get involved. He should walk away, let nature take its course. But he couldn't move. The image of the soldier reminded Joel of his son, Aaron, who had been conscripted into the Alliance years ago and never returned. His mind churned with guilt and memories as he stared at the wounded man. Spark nudged his leg, breaking his trance. All right, Joel said reluctantly. "But if this goes south, it's on you." Working quickly, Joel improvised a stretcher from a piece of broken drywall and some rope in his pack. He heaved the soldier onto it, grunting with the effort. "You better not wake up swinging," he muttered as he adjusted the makeshift harness. Spark stayed vigilant, scanning for threats as Joel dragged the stretcher back to their hideout, a task made even more treacherous by the uneven terrain. Every sound, every shift of rubble, set Joel's nerves on edge. The war may have left this part of New Denver in ruins, but danger was never far away. After what felt like hours, they reached Joel's hideout. The entrance was a narrow tunnel concealed beneath a collapsed subway platform. Joel had spent years fortifying it with traps and hidden passages to keep intruders out. Inside, it was a blend of utilitarian comfort and survivalist ingenuity: workbenches covered in tools, shelves stocked with scavenged supplies, and a makeshift cot in the corner. Joel set the stretcher down and examined the soldier's wounds under the dim glow of a flickering lamp. The gash on his side was deep, likely caused by shrapnel. Joel cleaned it with antiseptic, eliciting a groan from the unconscious man. He worked with steady hands, his mind replaying memories of treating minor injuries on Aaron when he was a boy. I don't know why I'm doing this, Joel muttered as he finished stitching the wound. You're the enemy. You shouldn't matter to me. Spark lay nearby, his glowing eyes fixed on Joel. The dog let out a soft beep, as if disagreeing with his owner's words. Joel sighed. Guess we'll find out if I just made the worst mistake of my life. As he covered the soldier with a blanket, Joel couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was more than a random act of fate. It felt like the start of something much bigger, though he couldn't yet see what lay ahead. Spark lay down beside the cot, his sensors attuned to any sign of danger, while Joel settled into his chair, watching the stranger with a mixture of suspicion and reluctant hope. Outside, the wind howled through the ruins, carrying with it the distant echoes of war. Joel paced the narrow confines of his shelter, glancing every so often at the injured soldier. Mikhail, he had managed to mutter his name when he briefly regained consciousness, was feverish, his face pale and beaded with sweat. Joel had done his best to clean the wound and prevent infection, but resources were limited. What he had was barely enough to patch up a scrape, let alone treat a deep shrapnel injury. Spark sat by the cot, his glowing blue eyes fixed on Mikhail as if studying him. Every so often, Spark's tail would twitch, and his collar would emit a soft hum, a sign that his scanners were active. Joel found the dog's vigil both reassuring and unnerving. You're not a nurse, Joel muttered, nudging Spark's metal flank with his boot. The dog tilted his head but didn't move. Fine. Watch him. But if he tries anything, I'm not hesitating. Joel leaned back against the cold wall, staring at the faint glow of his flickering lamp. The shelter was his fortress, carved out of the wreckage of New Denver's old subway system. It was a maze of tunnels and hidden chambers, fortified with traps and reinforced walls. Over the years, it had become his refuge, a place where the war's chaos felt distant, at least until now. By the third day, Mikhail was coherent enough to talk, though his voice was weak. Joel sat across from him, arms crossed, studying the young man. Spark sat between them, a silent referee. Why'd you help me? Mikhail rasped, his accent thick but his English clear. Joel shrugged. Didn't have a choice. Spark here wouldn't let me leave you. Mikhail's eyes flicked to the dog. Cyberdog. Alliance Tech? Old Tech, Joel corrected, his tone sharp. I built him. Back before all this. Mikhail seemed to consider this, his gaze drifting to the shelves of tools and scavenged parts lining the walls. You're not military. Not anymore, Joel said. He didn't elaborate, and Mikhail didn't press him. For a while, silence hung between them, broken only by the faint hum of Spark's systems. Joel finally spoke, his voice cautious. Your Eastern Coalition. What were you doing out here? Mikhail hesitated, his eyes narrowing. Joel could see the conflict on his face, whether to trust the man who saved his life or guard his secrets. Recon mission, Mikhail said finally. Got ambushed. My squad. They didn't make it. Joel nodded slowly. He had seen enough of the war's toll to believe Mikhail's story. Still, he couldn't afford to trust him completely. You're a long way from your lines. Mikhail let out a bitter laugh, wincing as it sent a jolt of pain through his side. Tell me about it. Over the next few days, Mikhail's strength slowly returned. Joel found himself reluctantly drawn into conversations with the young soldier. At first, their talks were brief and guarded questions about their respective backgrounds, short remarks about the state of the world. But as the tension eased, the exchanges grew longer, more personal. Mikhail spoke of his home in the Eastern Coalition, a small village nestled in the mountains. He painted a picture of a life Joel could almost envy, simple, peaceful, untouched by war until the draft pulled Mikhail into the conflict. Joel, in turn, shared fragments of his own story, how he had once worked as an engineer for the Western Alliance, designing tools meant to aid soldiers but ultimately used to destroy. They don't care about us, Mikhail said one evening, staring at the lamp's flickering light. East, west. It's all the same. We're just pieces on their board. Joel didn't respond, but Mikhail's words echoed his own thoughts, ones he had long buried beneath layers of bitterness and self-preservation. He thought of his son, Aaron, who had been one of those pieces, sent to fight in a war Joel didn't believe in. A war Aaron hadn't survived. One night, as Joel tinkered with Spark's leg joint, Mikhail broke the silence. "You said you're not military anymore. What happened?" Joel hesitated, his hands freezing mid-adjustment. He tightened the bolt on Spark's leg, then set his tools down with a sigh. "I built things, tools, machines, weapons. Back when I thought I was doing something good. Then I realized I wasn't fixing anything. Just making it worse." Mikhail nodded, his expression somber. "Why stay here, then? Why not leave?" Joel gestured vaguely at the walls around them. "Where would I go? The war's everywhere. Here, I can stay out of it. Survive." Mikhail looked at him for a long moment, then said softly, "You saved me. That's more than just surviving." Joel didn't know how to respond to that. Instead, he focused on Spark, tightening another bolt as the weight of Mikhail's words settled over him. As Mikhail's condition improved, Joel found himself wrestling with a growing unease. The soldier was no longer just a stranger or an enemy. He was a person, a young man thrust into a war he didn't choose, much like Joel's son. The war had always been black and white to Joel, east versus west, enemy versus ally. But now, sitting across from Mikhail, Joel saw shades of gray. He wondered if he had made a mistake bringing the soldier here. If Mikhail's presence would draw the war back into Joel's carefully guarded life. But every time doubt crept in, he glanced at Spark, whose unwavering watchfulness seemed to say otherwise. "Your trouble," Joel muttered to Mikhail one evening. "I can feel it." Mikhail smirked faintly, his voice still hoarse but laced with dry humor. "Takes one to know one." Joel shook his head, a reluctant smile tugging at his lips. Despite himself, he couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, helping Mikhail hadn't been a mistake after all. Joel woke to the sound of Spark's low, rhythmic hum. The dog's sensors were alert, his glowing eyes fixed on Mikhail, who sat on the edge of the cot. The soldier was hunched over, clutching something in his hands, a small metallic disc the size of a coin. Joel's eyes narrowed as he stepped forward, his voice low and cautious. "What's that?" Joel asked, gesturing to the object. Mikhail looked up, startled. He hesitated, his fingers tightening around the disc. For a moment, Joel thought the soldier might lie or brush him off. Instead, Mikhail sighed and held it up for Joel to see. "A data key," Mikhail said. "Encrypted." Joel's stomach twisted. He'd seen plenty of those during his time with the Western Alliance. They were used to store sensitive information, intel, weapon designs, classified orders. The fact that Mikhail had one raised questions Joel wasn't sure he wanted answered. "What's on it?" Joel asked, crossing his arms. Mikhail hesitated again, his jaw tightening. Finally, he spoke. "Blueprints. For a weapon your side is building. A weapon that could wipe out entire cities." Joel felt a chill creep up his spine. "You're talking about mass EMP deployment? No, a neutron disperser?" Mikhail shook his head. "Worse. A fusion destabilizer." The words hit Joel like a blow. He had heard whispers of the project before he left the Alliance, a theoretical device capable of collapsing the atomic structure of matter within a specified radius. The resulting destruction would make nuclear bombs look like firecrackers. Joel ran a hand through his graying hair, pacing the small room. "How did you get that?" he demanded, gesturing to the data key. "I was sent to retrieve it," Mikhail admitted. "To confirm the weapon's existence and bring the intel back to my command. But I never made it. My squad was ambushed before we could extract." Joel's mind raced. If the Eastern Coalition had sent soldiers on a reconnaissance mission to gather information about the weapon, it meant they were aware of its development. And if Mikhail was right, the Alliance was much further along in building the destabilizer than Joel had imagined. "Why are you telling me this?" Joel asked, his voice sharp. "What makes you think I won't turn you in?" Mikhail met his gaze, his eyes steady despite his weakened state. "Because you're not like them. You saved me. You don't want this war to keep going any more than I do." Joel scoffed, though the truth of Mikhail's words stung. "Even if I did believe you, what do you expect me to do about it? I'm one man, living in the ruins. I can't stop something this big." "You can," Mikhail said, his voice firm. He held up the data key. "You know their systems, their protocols. You used to work for them, didn't you? You could expose this to the world." Joel stared at him, his chest tightening. The idea of going up against the Alliance was ludicrous. He had spent years trying to disappear, to avoid being pulled back into the machine. But as he looked at Mikhail, Joel couldn't shake the image of his son, Aaron, being sent to fight in a war fueled by weapons like this. "If I even tried," Joel said slowly, "they'd find me. Find us. And kill us both." Mikhail leaned forward, his expression intense. "Then let them. Better to die fighting for something than hiding from everything." The following days were tense. Joel wrestled with the weight of the decision before him, while Mikhail recovered enough to help around the shelter. They worked in strained silence, the knowledge of the weapon looming over them like a dark cloud. One evening, Joel sat at his workbench, staring at the data key. Spark stood beside him, his glowing eyes watching intently. "What do you think, boy?" Joel asked quietly. "Am I crazy for even considering this?" Spark let out a soft hum, tilting his head as if urging Joel to act. Joel sighed, running a hand over the smooth surface of the data key. Finally, he made up his mind. He turned to Mikhail, who was sitting by the cot, sharpening a piece of scrap metal into a makeshift blade. "If we do this," Joel said, "there's no going back. No guarantees it'll even work." Mikhail nodded, his expression resolute. "I know." Joel leaned forward, his voice low. "We'll need to get into my old compound. That's where the main server is. It's the only place I can transmit this data without it being intercepted." Mikhail frowned. "Won't it be heavily guarded?" Joel smirked grimly. "Oh, you have no idea." The plan took shape over the next few days. Joel drew from his knowledge of the Alliance's security systems, designing a route that would minimize their exposure. Spark's advanced sensors and hacking capabilities would be key to bypassing the layers of surveillance and encryption. Mikhail, despite his injuries, insisted on helping, his military training proving invaluable. "Why are you so determined to do this?" Joel asked one night as they finalized their preparations. Mikhail's expression darkened. "Because I've seen what weapons like this can do. My home. My family. They're gone because of something not even half as dangerous. If we don't stop this, no one will." Joel nodded, the weight of Mikhail's words settling over him. He knew they were stepping into a world of danger, but for the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose, a chance to do something that mattered. As they packed their gear and prepared to leave the shelter, Joel glanced back at the small space that had been his refuge for so long. He knew he might never see it again, but for once, he didn't feel afraid. With Spark at his side and Mikhail behind him, Joel stepped into the darkness of the ruins, the data key clutched tightly in his hand. The journey to the Alliance compound was harrowing. Joel's old workplace, once a gleaming hub of innovation, was now a fortress, protected by automated drones, patrols, and the latest in security technology. Every step brought the trio closer to danger, and every shadow seemed to hold the promise of discovery. Spark led the way, his glowing eyes scanning for threats and transmitting real-time data to Joel's handheld device. The old engineer had modified the dog systems extensively for this mission, equipping him with advanced cloaking protocols and hacking tools that made Spark an indispensable ally. "Guard patrol, 50 meters ahead," Joel whispered, holding up his hand to stop Mikhail. He steadied the screen, watching the path of 2 armed soldiers pacing in front of a gate. "They'll circle back in 20 seconds. Be ready." Mikhail nodded, his grip tightening on the makeshift blade strapped to his hip. Though still recovering from his injuries, the soldier moved with a quiet determination, his focus razor-sharp. When the patrol rounded the corner, Joel and Mikhail slipped through the gate, Spark trailing behind them. The dog emitted a soft beep, signaling that he had disabled the cameras overhead. They were in. Inside the compound, the air was cold and sterile, a stark contrast to the ruins outside. Joel felt a pang of familiarity as they moved through the corridors. The walls were lined with panels he had once helped design, their sleek surfaces now a grim reminder of the purpose they served. "The server room is 3 floors down," Joel said, his voice barely audible. "We'll need Spark to bypass the locks." "Let's move," Mikhail replied, scanning the hallway ahead. His military instincts kept him on edge, his eyes darting to every corner. As they descended deeper into the facility, the security grew tighter. Spark worked tirelessly, hacking keypads and redirecting surveillance feeds. Joel's heart pounded every time they paused, his mind racing with the consequences of being caught. They finally reached the server room, a reinforced chamber at the center of the compound. Joel approached the door, his hands shaking as he connected Spark's uplink to the access terminal. The dog's eyes flickered as he processed the encryption, emitting a series of soft clicks. "Hurry," Mikhail urged, his voice tense. "We don't have much time." With a final beep, the door slid open. Joel exhaled in relief as they slipped inside, the dim light casting long shadows across the room. Rows of servers hummed softly, their blinking lights creating a rhythmic glow. Joel worked quickly, connecting the data key to the central terminal. Lines of code filled the screen as he navigated the Alliance's network, searching for a way to transmit the files without triggering an alert. Sweat dripped down his forehead as his fingers flew across the keyboard. Come on, he muttered, his eyes scanning the screen. Behind him, Mikhail stood guard, his blade at the ready. Spark sensors continued to monitor the hallway, his collar emitting a faint hum. "There," Joel said, his voice triumphant. The data was uploading to multiple watchdog groups and independent news outlets, ensuring that the information couldn't be suppressed. He watched the progress bar inch forward, every second feeling like an eternity. Suddenly, Spark emitted a sharp beep. Joel turned to see the dog's eyes flashing red. "Hostiles," Mikhail said, his voice grim. "They found us." The first shots rang out as Joel pulled the data key from the terminal. Mikhail shoved him behind a server rack, taking cover as armed guards flooded the hallway. Spark moved like a ghost, his cloaking systems flickering as he darted between the guards, disabling them with precision strikes. "Get down!" Mikhail shouted, returning fire with a weapon he had taken from one of the guards earlier. Joel crouched low, clutching the data key as he watched the chaos unfold. The room was a blur of gunfire, sparks, and shouts. Spark's agility was unmatched. The dog moved with machine-like efficiency, taking out guards one by one. But the sheer number of enemies threatened to overwhelm them. Joel felt a surge of panic as the firefight intensified. "We need to get out of here," Mikhail shouted, his voice barely audible over the noise. Joel nodded, clutching the data key tightly. He activated a remote command on Spark's system, signaling the dog to lead them to the exit. Spark barked in acknowledgement, his sensors guiding them through the chaos. They moved as fast as they could, dodging bullets and evading guards. The compound's alarms blared, red lights flashing as the facility went into lockdown. Joel's heart raced as they neared the surface, the cold night air a welcome relief as they burst through the final gate. The trio didn't stop running until they were far from the compound, the sound of the alarms fading into the distance. Joel collapsed against a crumbled wall, his chest heaving as he struggled to catch his breath. Mikhail leaned against a nearby pillar, his face pale but determined. "Did it work?" Joel nodded, holding up the data key. "The files are out. They'll see it. The world will see it." Spark sat beside Joel, his glowing eyes dimming as his systems powered down to conserve energy. The dog's metal body was scratched and scorched, but he had made it through. In the weeks that followed, the leak sent shockwaves through the world. The revelation of the fusion destabilizer sparked outrage, forcing both the Eastern Coalition and the Western Alliance to the negotiating table. Under intense pressure from the global community, the Alliance announced the immediate suspension of the project. Joel, Mikhail, and Spark remained in hiding, moving between the ruins to avoid detection. Their actions had made them targets, but they found solace in the knowledge that their sacrifice had made a difference. The war's momentum had slowed, and for the first time in years, there was talk of peace. One night, as they sat by a small fire in an abandoned building, Joel looked at Mikhail and Spark. He felt a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years, a sense of hope. "We did it," Joel said quietly, his voice filled with quiet pride. "We stopped it." Mikhail nodded, his expression softening. "For now. But there's still work to do." Joel glanced at Spark, who lay beside him, his tail wagging faintly. He reached out, running a hand over the dog's metal flank. "Then we keep going. Together." As the fire crackled and the night stretched on, the trio sat in silence, their bond forged in the crucible of war. The future remained uncertain, but for the first time in years, Joel felt a glimmer of hope, a belief that change was possible. And that, perhaps, was enough.